Assalamu alaikum. This is the first video in the series of video lecture for chapter number 9, which is the valuing bonds with embedded options. If you remember, when we discussed the bond valuation and when we discussed the option-free bond valuation, we said that the presence of an embedded option in a bond makes the valuation of bond complicated, right? The valuation process for the bond begins with benchmark interest rates, right? So let me discuss this. The first step is to determine benchmark interest rate, and the benchmark interest rate for a bond can be obtained, as we know already, that from either from the treasury market, from a sector of the bond market, or from the market for the issuer securities, the issuer we are for which we are valuing this particular bond. When used to discount cash flows, the spot rates or the rates that would produce a model value equal to the observed market prices for underrun securities in the benchmark. So we use the spot rates to calculate this value, to value the particular embedded option bond. If the market used to establish the market is a sector of the bond market or the market for the issuer security, the underrun issues are estimates of the market price would be if newly issued option-free securities with different securities also, right? So if the benchmark is sector of the market, no matter how complex the valuation model, when each underrun issue for a benchmark security is valued using the model, the value produced should be equal to the underrun issue market price, right? So whatever model we use, the value we should obtain should be the market price. And the underrun issues for a given benchmark are assumed to be fairly priced in that particular model. The first complication in building model to value bonds with embedded option is that the future cash flows will depend on what happens with the interest, right? So not only the future discount rate, but also the future cash flows are dependent on the interest rate, right? So for example, if it's a call option, its future cash flow depend on whether the issuer is going to call that particular bond or not. So future interest rate must be considered in valuation. This is done by considering how interest rate will change based on some interest rate volatility. Remember, we have discussed the concept of interest rate volatility in our last chapter, and we incorporate that concept of interest rate volatility, that how interest will change in the model. Given the assumed interest rate volatility, an interest rate tree representing possible future interest rate consistent with the volatility assumption can be constructed. We will look at in this chapter, in our future videos, we will look at how to construct that interest rate tree. First, the interest rate on the tree are used to generate the cash flow considering the embedded option. So based on that assumed interest rate volatility, interest rate tree represent possible future interest rate consistent with the volatility assumption. So we construct that the first interest rate on the tree are used to generate the cash flows considering the embedded option. Second, the interest rates on the tree are used to compute present value. So interest rate tree is used in two different ways to get these things. Now, interest rate models. An interest rate model is a probabilistic description of how interest rates can change our life of the bond. The interest rate models commonly used are based on how short-term interest rates can evolve, over. Consequently, these interest rate models are referred to as one factor model, where factor means only one interest rate is being modeled over time. And we can have two factor models when we say that an interest rate may specify how short-term as well as long-term rates can change. Then we refer it as two factor model. it can be assumed that interest rates can realize one of the two possible rates in the next period. For the simplified version, in order to understand this, and we refer that kind of interest rate tree as a binomial model. There are valuation models that assume that interest rates can take on three possible rates in the next periods, and these models are called trinomial models. But for the sake of our discussion and for the sake of this course, we will be assuming that we are following a binomial model. There are even more complex interest rate models. The interest rate tree generated must produce a value for the securities in the benchmark that is equal to their observed market price. That is, it must produce an arbitrage-free value. So the purpose of our interest rate tree and then the valuation tree is to get the value equal to the market price. Once an interest rate tree is generated, that should have these two characteristics: is consistent with both interest rate volatility assumption and interest rate model, and generate the observed market price for the securities of the market. The next step is to use the interest rate tree to value a bond with an embedded option. For this, a set of rules must be introduced to determine for any period when the embedded option will be exercised. However, basic principle remains same. What is the basic principle? Basic principle is that the value of the bond is the present value of future cash flows, right? But we have to introduce some set of rules about when that embedded option will be exercised by the issuer or the investor who ever had that option. For a model to value a bond with embedded option, the interest rate tree is used to value future cash flows, and the interest rate tree is combined with the CAR rule to generate the future cash flow if it's a call option. Okay, the overview of the bond valuation process. Regardless if the bond has an embedded option or not, the bond is valued in the same way as we discussed in chapter number 5. So, given a required yield to maturity, we can compute the value of the bond. For example, if the required yield to maturity for a 9-year 8% coupon bond that pays interest rate 7%, its price is 106.59. We can easily confirm this. So it's an 8% coupon, 7% 7% is yield. It will be trading at a premium, and this will be the price. And if given observed market price, if we have a market price just like 93.48, we can calculate yield to maturity. And given the yield to maturity, a yield spread can be computed. So far, if we have a yield to maturity, we can calculate the yield spread for that particular bond from that yield to maturity. But the problem with using a single interest rate, as we already discussed when computing the value of bond, is that it fails to recognize that each cash flow is unique and warrants its own discount rate. Failure to discount each cash flow at an appropriate interest unique to when that cash flow is expected to be received results in an arbitrage opportunity. The same kind of arbitrage opportunity we discussed in our previous chapter. We discussed the concept of theoretical spot rates. The reason is that I just explained that there will be an arbitrage opportunity if we do not use the theoretical spot rates. Using the spot rate curve, one obtains the bond price. However, is the spot rate curve used to compute the yield to maturity? So how we can price the bond, but how we calculate the yield to maturity then? The answer is we use zero volatility spread instead of YTM. Remember, we have discussed the zero volatility spread, also called Z spread, and the static spread is the spread when, so this is very important. Zero volatility spread is a spread when added to all spot rates will make the present value of bonds cash flow equal to the bonds market price. That is what we call zero volatility spread, and when we measure the benchmark for us or we measure the YTM for these bonds using zero volatility spreads for embedded option bonds. When a bond has an embedded option, a portion of the yield and therefore portion of the spread is attributable to the embedded option. And valuing a bond with embedded option, it is necessary to adjust the spread for the value of embedded option. The measure that does this is called the option adjusted spread, which we have already discussed in our one of the lectures. I think it was chapter 4, I believe. Okay. Then there is a concept of the benchmark interest rate and relative value analysis. So the yield spread measures are used in assessing the relative value of securities. Relative value analysis involved identifying securities that can potentially enhance return relative to a benchmark. Relative value analysis can be used to identify securities as being overpriced, underpriced, or fairly priced. The relative value analysis we use, the question is what benchmark we should use, and the benchmark we use can be from the treasury market. It can be specific to bond sector with a given credit rating or a specific issuer, and it can be a yield curve of that particular market or segment, or the spot rate curve. So we actually have these 6 possibilities. The second question is how to interpret or what it measures. So as we already discussed, there can be a nominal spread, there can be a zero volatility spread, and there can be an option adjusted spread. A nominal spread, if its benchmark is treasury yield curve, it measures credit risk, option risk, and liquidity risk. Zero volatility curve also measure these 3 things, where the option adjusted spread only measures credit risk and liquidity risk, as it is already adjusted for option risk. Then we have if the bond is based on a specific sector. Again, the interpretation of these 3 rates will remain the same. Credit risk, however, in this case means that the credit risk of a security under consideration relative to the credit risk of the sector used as the benchmark. Liquidity risk also is the liquidity risk of the security under consideration relative to the benchmark. However, when we switch to the issuer specific benchmarks, and then when we call about nominal, zero coupon, and option adjusted spread for issuer specific benchmark, then there is no credit risk, because we have already matched that with the issuer. So credit risk is assumed that a specific issue analyzed has the same credit risk as the embedded in the issuer's benchmark. Using the nominal spread, a value that is positive indicate that ignoring any embedded option, the issuer is cheap relative to how market is pricing. Okay. Then there is, if in the book you can find this section of OAS benchmark and relative value. So what we mean by OAS, option adjusted benchmark, we have already explained it. Let me explain it again. When benchmark is a treasury spot rate for OAS, a zero OAS means that the security offers no spread over treasuries. Hence, the security with a zero OAS in this case should be avoided, because it offers no extra return over treasuries. Again, also a negative OAS security should also be avoided, because it also offers nothing. Only positive OAS securities should be purchased, and we should be interested in those securities. We will refer to the OAS offered on a comparable securities as the required OAS, right? So whether is option embedded security cheap or fairly priced should only be considered in relation to the comparable securities. So OAS on a compared security is referred as required OAS, and the OAS computed for the security is referred to as security OAS. If security OS is greater than the required OS, security is cheap, and the relation goes on. If it's less, security is rich. If they are equal, security is fairly priced, right? So basically, the benchmark for our treasury securities is the option adjusted spread rather than the nominal or the other spreads. Thank you.